Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González back again with another travel guide. For those of you interested in our travel series, we are bringing you today to, part of the world, part of Europe we haven't really explored all that much here in Travolution Tours, which is France. So today we have a proposal for you guys, which is doing the area of Mediterranean Occitan, but specifically as a road trip around the French coast. So I will be discussing a little bit in terms of logistics, just because, well, when we're talking about a road trip, these things kind of matter. But besides that, remember that the format of these travel guides is always to try and provide you some ideas, some options for places off the beaten path, hidden gems, and, other sustainable locations that perhaps you would be able to engage. And before I get started properly, just to thank once again all of our supporters, donors, and patrons in our PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. It is thanks to their support that we keep on doing all of these lectures, tours, and talks for everybody to enjoy. Thank you so much. And if you want to help us out with that little project, you have the links right below for the PayPal and the Buy Me a Coffee to keep on sustaining our endeavors. And now, without any further ado, let's crack on with the logistics of this road trip. Well, first things first, as you know, planning a road trip is not a small feat, so don't underestimate it. When you are dealing with a road trip, you need to have a couple of things in mind. First of all, is your base going to be set or are you going to be moving every day? I am a lot more fond of road trips where at least my base is fixed. Why? Because, well, in reality, it's much more convenient for us to have a base that we can go back to, rest, relax, etc. And more importantly, when you're doing a road trip, of course, you need to always be thinking about your car. Having one single base means that at least you know where you're parking at the end of the day. In this day and age, parking is not necessarily the easiest thing to come across, and particularly in the rise of the issues that we are seeing in the industry of Airbnb, holiday rentals, etc., etc. So this is one of the reasons why I think having a base is easy, because at worst you will be paying a parking fee at a local town that goes, to their taxes and all that jazz. And if you're lucky, maybe the accommodation that you've bought actually, brings this kind of commodity for you. You can nonetheless do this road trip moving from one place to another. That's entirely up to you. I'm not here to control your decisions, but simply to give you, what I think may be a bit easier. Also, I genuinely think that the idea of having one base is a little bit more sustainable, because it means a little bit less, expense of the car. You're gonna be able to fix the car every so often in a place that doesn't require, moving around, which is important at the end of the day. Since I'm talking about sustainability, I appreciate that car traffic and transport and fumes are not necessarily the more sustainable. But my entire point in here is that you should be able to do this journey without, depending on airplanes. Unless any of you are traveling from very, very far away, of course, in which case, well, that is the cost that I guess the modern world has generated for us in terms of mobility. But this should be something that hopefully doesn't require a lot of miles. And, it's overall a road trip that doesn't require us longer than 2-hour journeys maximum in terms of petrol, in terms of emissions, something else to consider. And by the way, as much as I'm saying this is a road trip, thanks to the wonders of French public transportation, you can actually do this by bus or by train, which, is another way of actually making your journey more sustainable. So something else to consider for those of you that potentially don't drive or that even want to go the extra mile to, make things better. Now, there are a couple of places in this map that I'm not going to be mentioning at all. For example, Narbonne, for example, Perpignan, Avignon, which is just a little bit further up here, and Marseille. Why? Well, those are places that I think already get a lot of credit without necessarily, me having to highlight it. I am gonna highlight some places that, of course, are well known, but since part of this idea is to give you a different view and take you to places that perhaps you didn't know, I decided to kind of eliminate those factors. But of course, because as you can see, they're perfectly aligned on the road, if you wanted to extend this or if you wanted to include those places in your visit, very easy for you to do so. Now, for those of you who may have to fly to the general area, your best airports are Toulouse, which is actually just off the map here on the left. It's about 2 hour, I reckon, between Toulouse and Beziers. Marseille, of course, which is not far away from here, a bit farther down to the right. But even some of these smaller locations, including Narbonne, Beziers, Montpellier, of course, Carcassonne, etc., do have local airports. So it may be possible that you can switch and come to one of these destinations a bit more direct. But, something to consider, of course, in terms of the logistics. Now, the first thing that we're going to be looking at is our base. I proposed 2 of them. Of course, the sky is the limit. And then as you can see, I've tried to do this with a little bit of common sense. When we're doing a road trip, we need to consider it's a long, type of journey. So the big day is really going to be the first thing that we're gonna do, which also means it is the farthest away point in our travel. Then we're gonna do a little bit of rural tourism, which I think is very important and something that I, like to encourage people to do, particularly not just from the point of view of green tourism, but sustainability and affordability, not just for yourselves, but for the locals. It's important to leave our money distributed in different places. Then we're gonna be heading west towards Carcassonne, where I actually have perhaps some shocking news for some of you. And then finally, we're going to get closer and closer to the Spanish border to visit 2 very small little villages, which I think have a lot of charm and that actually have a lot of history, particularly the latter one. And today, I hope you will be able to forgive me. I will perhaps be ending on a not necessarily dark, but certainly somber tone, because what Collioure means to the people of Spain and the fact that, well, this year we're commemorating many things, and well, this will make a lot of sense in a few moments. But I shall not anticipate myself. First things first, let's start choosing our base. Well, for our base, we have 2 options. We have the city of Beziers and we have the city of Montpellier. I personally think that Beziers is the better option, and I'll explain why. Beziers has a local airport, like I said. It is on the river Orbe, so if you want to follow the Canal du Midi, you're actually able to do this. And as an alternative, you could do the vast majority of this journey on a, canal boat type of situation. So another way that you can process this road trip as something that isn't actually a road trip. But anyways, now Beziers is one of the oldest cities in France. It's actually the second one just after Marseille itself. And Beziers is a relatively small town. You see, it barely has 80,000 inhabitants, which is the reason why I think it makes for a better base. First things first, the locals in Beziers probably need your money a little bit more than the ones in Montpellier. Second of all, if you book in advance, you're going to be able to find accommodation that is a little bit more budget friendly. And by actually going to a city that is small, you may be able to also enjoy some quietness. That is not to say that there are not things to do in Beziers, not at all. But, when we're doing a road trip and when we're thinking of vacation, I think it's also important that we think about our rest. And sometimes being in the middle of a very busy city is not necessarily the best way to disconnect from our already very busy lives. That is not to say, like I said, that Beziers doesn't have things to offer. First of all, the views around this area are absolutely stunning. This is taken from the top. In fact, this is taken from right there, the area where the cathedral is located. It is a very comfortable city, surrounded by what's essentially winemaking country. So if you are into eno-tourism, perhaps some opportunities for you to engage with that different branch of vacations, so to speak. Now, Beziers is a city that has really good restaurants, that has plenty of amenities in terms of supermarkets, all that stuff that you may require when you're out and about. So, despite being small, it's actually very comfortable. You can actually make a day out while visiting Beziers. Just one day should be enough unless you want to spend more time because, well, Beziers has some interesting sights. The city, as you look here, is quite charming, very walkable. The distances aren't very long, which is another reason why it makes for a comfortable base. You don't need to be, running around like a headless chicken to get to places. The aesthetics of the city are a bit mixed. Sometimes you find parts that are more modern, then you find elements of what used to be the medieval city, which is actually what most of the core town remains. You see, the city of Beziers was actually related to the ruler of Carcassonne and the Trencabel family. We'll be talking about the Trencabel a bit more in a moment. And it is Beziers, the reason why I choose this to be the base for our road trip, because you see, you're probably wondering, well, Lily, this is all good, but we all know that you always have some kind of agenda to go to these places, which is perfectly true. So what was your agenda this time around? Well, as you all probably know by now, I'm a medieval historian. And as a medieval historian, even though I'm normally an early medievalist, there is an element of medieval history that pretty much every single historian has to go through, which is the period of the Crusades. Some of the Crusades that happen in the Middle Ages take place in Europe, and one of the most famous European Crusades takes place all across the area of Occitan overall, which is where we are basing this road trip, by the way. That's what this area of France is now known as, but perhaps you know it by other names, like the area of Languedoc-Roussillon, often referred to as Languedoc-Roussillon with a hyphen in between. Well, this area will be the epicenter of the Albigensian Crusade. The Albigensian Crusade is essentially a crusade launched against the Cathars, which are heretical, let's say, doctrine, not necessarily of Christianity. They have some takes on Christianity, but the Cathars have some ideologies that are similar to Manichaeism, dualism, Buddhism, other isms. So, I don't want to throw them all in the same bag. But in any case, you need to understand that the King of France and the Pope were upset with them, very much so. So in any case, this is going to be a very nasty type of event, and the city of Beziers is exactly one of the key points of that big massacre that takes place, where the papal legate essentially arrives to the city. The soldiers kind of ask him, well, how are we going to identify Cathars from ordinary people? Because they were all mixed together, and the people from Beziers didn't particularly want to hand each other over. And the papal legate essentially goes to say, well, kill them all because God will recognize his own. And so the entire town is pretty much butchered up for the sake of religion, which is the reason why this cathedral that you see here, lovely cathedral in Beziers, is actually the second one in place from the 13th century after the Albigensian Crusade. So, since this is such a famous episode of history, which I've studied many times and what have you not, I really wanted to engage with the city where all of these things happen, and that, in part inspired my desire to learn about the Middle Ages. On top of that, generally, it's just such a pleasant city to visit. Very comfortable, very homely and safe, which is also important. But perhaps if you want something a bit more grand, your option would be Montpellier. You see, Montpellier is one of the largest cities in France, the seventh in the ranking, with a total of 300,000 inhabitants in the city and a metropolitan area of over 800,000. It is actually a very important city because of the university as well. It's actually one of the oldest universities in the whole world, existing since 1160, if I remember correctly. And in fact, one of the oldest still operating med schools ever. So, as you can see, very different vibes, much more modern, much more cosmopolitan, much busier. This is one of the epicenters in the city itself, which is La Place de la Comédie, a very focal point for the overall development and tourism of the area of Montpellier. Most of the architecture of Montpellier is, as you're seeing in here, from the 16th to the 19th century. 19th century aesthetics are quite predominant in the core of the city and the general, I guess, idea of the Belle Époque in France. In fact, Montpellier, in some cases, looks a little bit like Paris, except people from Montpellier have a very different attitude and drivers are not crazy. So, one of those things to consider. Now, Montpellier is not just a big cosmopolitan city, it's surrounded by greenery. It has parks, botanical gardens, a zoo, which is free of charge, by the way, and you can just get up there with the tram, which is, by the way, very fast and cheap, and very easy to navigate, very intuitive. So you don't even need a car to be in Montpellier city, at least. Montpellier, again, is a town where there is a lot of stuff to do, lots of sport, lots of culture. The International Mediterranean Film Festival, second only to Cannes, takes place in Montpellier, and every year. So, as you can see, slightly different vibes, slightly different opportunities as to what is available. The city has many different facets. You can go from your modern commercial streets here on the right with the pink umbrellas, and there is lots of shopping and that kind of stuff if you are interested. Then you have the cathedral, which is, by the way, national monument of France because of this very peculiar Gothic that you see in here. Or you have, elements of perhaps more classic French aesthetics, which go all the way from the time of Louis the 14th here in the Porte du Perrault to later on into the 18th century. So much more varied, I would say, the city of Montpellier is. Also because it's a university town, there are parts of the city where you can find, cheaper options and deals, but at the same time, rentals can be a bit trickier because, of course, there's a lot of competition all year round. So, depending on when you're planning to travel, keep that in mind. Well, now that we have our two bases of operations settled, let's go for our first day out, which is the city of Nîmes. Ah, Nîmes, another place that I had been wanting to go for such a long time. Nîmes is known in the history world as the French Rome. This small city of about 150,000 inhabitants is famously known in history as Colonia Nemansus, one of the most important in the Gallo-Roman world, in France for sure, and amongst the best examples of conservation worldwide. In fact, Nîmes is a UNESCO town because, partially, the monument you're seeing right in front of you. This is Les Arènes de Nimes, the arena of Nimes from the year 100 AD, one of the best preserved in the whole world. It holds capacity for about 24,000 spectators because this is actually not just a heritage site, it's actually used for, events of all kinds. Dua Lipa had one of her recent world tour concerts right here, more frequently also used as a bullfighting venue. But traditionally, this was, of course, one of the most important arenas for Roman games and gladiatorial combat. In fact, some of the best evidence we have outside of Rome come from here. And the actual site itself, which you can visit, it's been kind of redone underneath the areas where the gladiators used to have their chambers and whatnot to tell the story of the gladiator types, the games, the conditions of a gladiator school, etc., which is actually a very well done interactive visit, and I think very good value for money. There is, by the way, a combined ticket that you can buy at the Tourist Information Office, which is just on the other side of the arena, that will give you access, by the way, to all or the different sites of the Roman heritage and UNESCO protection in the city of Nîmes. If you're planning to visit, I very much recommend that you do. Well, but the main reason, though, why I wanted to come to Nîmes is because of this. The building in front of you is La Maison Carrée, a building that I've been studying since I was 16 years old. Why? Because it is considered one of the finest surviving Roman pieces of architecture and the best preserved Roman temple worldwide. As an art historian and as a cultural historian, this has been, drilled in the back of my mind. I have known the floor plans, the importance of this building, etc., for God knows how long, 18 years plus nowadays. So this is actually the reason why I wanted to come to Nîmes alongside with everything else. And in case you're wondering, La Maison Carrée was done in the late first century before Common Era, before Christ, during the period of Augustus. It was dedicated to the imperial cult, and it really goes to show, the power of imperial Rome straight from the get-go. It's an area that is honestly in such a great state of conservation. UNESCO heritage sites are supposed to be that way, but sometimes you go to some of them and you think, well, crikey, this I was expecting more, right? That was pretty much, I think, my experience of the Acropolis in Athens, for example. And yet you go to some others and you're thinking, wow, okay, yeah, this is literally me being transported to the past. La Maison Carrée is definitely that. Inside, the space is relatively small, though, because Roman temples were actually normally pretty small in that regards, but they have an exhibition with interactive bits and pieces explaining everything that you need to know about La Maison Carrée and its wonderful conservation work, by the way. And just so you understand, in terms of distance, how far away these two monuments are from each other, I think the walk from Les Arènes to La Maison Carrée is about 15-20 minutes. It's not a long distance at all. You don't really need to move through public transport once you are in Nîmes. So if you're driving to Nîmes, my recommendation is drop the car in a car park somewhere, even sometimes in street parking for free if you plan appropriately, and then just walk around the city. Is generally very walkable, not very long distances anywhere. And even if so, again, public transport works very good in here. Now you need to carry on walking up a little bit farther into the city so that you can encounter this beautiful Jardin de la Fontaine, what used to be an old sanctuary now turned into a park that leads up to Montpellier. It's an area that is full of ruins, memorials, history, beautiful greenery. So any time of the year that you visit, it is really, really charming, to be honest. And originally, like I said, this was an old sanctuary where we have found evidence of Roman and Gallo worship. So even if you don't come with a specific plan, just roaming around the garden will really show you some very beautiful sights. But then you make it to the top. And at the top is this tower. This is La Tour Magne. This is an old Roman tower, which has been renovated and reused years later, so of course. And in fact, it became a really popular spot. And one of the reasons why it kept on being used and renovated is because Nostradamus, who, by the way, was a student of the University of Montpellier, so you can see the ties across the different sections of this road trip. Nostradamus had a prophecy that suggested, there was lots of gold and treasure in this area. So, well, it kind of became a bit of a cult place, so to speak. And the most impressive thing, though, once you go in here, considering that Roman view towers are not very common in this day and age, are the views. From up here, you get to see the entirety of Nîmes and out into the countryside, which is really spectacular. And well, this also gives you, I think, a bit more of an idea of how compact the city is, how comfortable in that regards, and also the beautiful greenery everywhere, how easy it is to actually just, even without leaving the city, spend some time surrounded by nature. But I honestly could go on about Nîmes on and on. The cathedral in Nîmes is quite interesting. The medieval quarter of the city is actually quite well preserved too, but in Nîmes what primes is Roman history. And as a final evidence of that, you also have Le Musée de la Romanité, which is right next to Les Arènes, and it's a really wonderful exhibition with some of the best evidence that they have of Roman history and culture in the area. The quality of the finds is incredibly high, as I think you can tell here from this mosaic and the statue of the soldier. The interpretation is incredible, and the museum itself is on a state-of-the-art facility. They have like a panoramic terrace up top. The gift shop is actually really good. There is a coffee shop, the displays are very new. Again, lots of interactive modern stuff. Really a great museum. And consider that I've been to many museums. You know that I don't give praise if I don't think it is genuinely due. So definitely one to visit. And with this, just by doing these things that I've suggested here, you've used your whole day up. But there is a lot more, I promise you. Nîmes is just, again, a very likable, very walkable, very livable city. So, make sure to explore on your feet as much as possible. Now, once you've come back from Nîmes and you are ready for day 2, we will take you to the countryside. And to the countryside, we're gonna take a road up either, well, roughly halfway through between Beziers and Montpellier to le Parc Naturel Régional des Grands Causses. This is a beautiful national park of about 380,000 hectares. Spoiler alert, this is probably the one part of this road trip that you would struggle doing without a car because we're going into nature and into villages. And as much as French public transport is really great, some of these places are heavily isolated. But if you wanted to do it still through public transport or try to reduce your carbon footprint, I guess you could either hire a car for the day or maybe even get an organized visit by some kind of tour operator up that way. Not necessarily the way I recommend you do this, but like I said, those are some options. You see, this whole area is shepherd country. The roads are incredible. The views are fascinating. It is beautiful, and it is, of course, UNESCO landscape as well. This is an area with lots of plateaus and valleys and gorges. Very much overall karstic landscape through and through. And one of the reasons why I would very much recommend that you come out here is because if you want to go for a hike, go for a hike. If you just want to go from little village to another village, you do that too. You're not going to encounter a lot of people. This is a little slice of serenity in the south of France. If you really want to engage with green tourism, this is the place to do it. You can imagine all the kind of mountain sports that you can do in here. But the main reason why I came here is because of what you see here on the left screen. La Maison des Vautours is the most incredible conservation center for vultures in not just Europe, but one of the best in the world. The agglomeration that you see there on the left, those are as many vultures as I was able to catch just in one picture. It's incredible. This is all built in the area of the Gorge de la Jonte, in case you want the exact location, and it is both a museum and observation platform of global importance because they conserve the four types of vultures in the whole world, and they've been reintroducing them and being very successful at doing this since the 80s. So, if you want to contribute a little bit of your human grain to try to preserve the wonderful nature that we have all around us, this is a wonderful place where to do that. On the deck of the observation platform, you don't just see the vultures, as they are, in the wild. They also have some telescopes like the one that you see right here, and you can actually see vultures really, really up close. In case that you don't get lucky, because maybe the weather or you're not very good at aiming the telescope as I was to begin with, they also have inside in the museum, besides the many different displays that explain everything that you could possibly ever know about vultures and their reintroduction and conservation in this area, they have an audiovisual that they build with cameras that they have put in some of the vultures that they track so that we understand how far they move, what they do, how they interact with each other is actually really cool. So 100% recommend. And it wasn't very expensive at all. I can't remember from the top of my head, but it generally was not a big expense. Plus the drive up here is absolutely gorgeous. And actually I have a picture that I took from the car, so you can see, first of all, the state of the road, and second of all, the views. And on that note, this is really not the kind of journey I would recommend you would do with a little Ford Fiesta or a Fiat 500, okay? I'm not necessarily suggesting you do the Homer Simpson thing of buying a Camionero and taking it all around, but for the general sake of your comfort and the fact that, this is a part of France where it rains quite regularly, get yourself a car that is at least comfortable to drive on some of these mountain roads. But again, the views, as you can see, absolutely spectacular. Well, We will go back from Le Maçon de Voitures all the way down, well, I say all the way down as if it's very far away, a few kilometers down to a beautiful village called Saint-Eulalie de Cernon. This is in the area of Millau and Larzac, which is the area, the name of the valley and sort of the district that you see in here. And why do we come through here? Well, it's the other reason why we came to the area of Occitan and that I had sort of spoiled already in Beziers, but this is Crusader country. You see, the little village of Saint-Eulalie de Cernon was actually the Crusader commandery for the Knights Templar. In fact, the village just above it is La Cavalerie, where the other cavalry building of the Crusaders used to be located. What you see in here in the actual village, apart from being a beautiful preserved village, most of the look of the village itself currently from the 18th century, is the uh, actual installations by the Knights Templar. Well, the Templars had in here a 12th century church and some apartments as well. Later on, they were taken over by the Knights Hospitallers. So, we have a degree of continuation, I guess, between one and the other. It is very rare that we get to experience this kind of history because, well, as you all know, the Templars kind of go up in smoke. And in fact, there is in the very, pun not intended, in the in the very apartments that you visit in this little village, there is an audiovisual explaining the history of the Templars, their association to the area, etc., etc. Um, Also, eating around this part of the country is wonderful. Um, be mindful though, because timetables can be a little bit tricky since we're in the middle of, countryside and not necessarily an area a lot of people know. The majority of the tourists that you're gonna find around here are local French from either surrounding areas or a bit farther up north. I don't think a lot of international tourists necessarily are very well aware of this, which is, well, another reason why, going off the beaten path helps. But finding places to eat, it can be a bit of an ordeal because these are small villages. So your best recommendation for this day is bringing yourself a picnic and therefore engage in a very French tradition, or there are some little, outposts, some little vans and vendors and whatnot that you can get stuff from. And even if you cannot eat it in their own establishment, this area is full of parks and little squares where you can just sit down and have a bite to eat. And then the last thing that you're gonna do before leaving the area of Larzac is engage in the Velo Rail, which is this is the beautiful views that we get to engage from the Velo Rail to Larzac, which using Occitan here, they create these bike trails. So you get to do a little bit of exercise while having a little bit of fun. It's a great group activity. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for just one person. It may be a bit too tiring, although they have different routes depending on the amount of people, that is going to take place. I just thought that it was such a beautiful, wonderful thing, you know, to do and engage with. Incredible. And the landscape, of course, very, very cool. Well, now that we've done our interesting things here and there, let's talk about the the elephant in the room, because I mean, realistically, you cannot come down to Occitan and not visit Carcassonne. As somebody who has been to Carcassonne several times, although perhaps a bit of a stereotype, it is very much a visit that I do recommend. But I will give you some very specific details about how to do your visit of Carcassonne, because most people come to Carcassonne expecting to need a whole day, and the reality is that that's not really needed. Some of you may have done some of my virtual tours, either here on YouTube or Zoom. I do have a virtual tour of Carcassonne. The tape is about 45, 50 minutes, something like that. And it took me an hour and a half to film those 50 minutes, which is what it took me to actually go around the city of Carcassonne. The reality is La Cité de Carcassonne, which is the area that is recognized by UNESCO, by the way, is actually very small. The I think I don't know if it's package deals or whatever, make it sound like it's an incredibly huge place, but it's not. And there isn't actually all that much to do in Carcassonne either. Now consider that in La Cité, which is the fortified city, I think there is less than 54, 70, something like that, people that live in there currently, which, is not a lot. So it's a very, very small area. It is true that you have the actual town itself of Carcassonne, what they call over there La Bastide, which is where the locals will go to after during the Albigensian Crusade. Once again, the King of France will essentially kick them out of the town. They told them that they couldn't stay in here because this was now territory that was taken away by the French authority. So they just literally went down the corner and built their town down there. But honestly, there isn't all that much to do and see in here. Besides the fortress, you have the basilica and the Chateau Comtal, and that's kind of it. To some extent, many of the package deals that people offer to take you to Carcassonne are a little bit of a tourist trap. It's a very good place to eat. Sure, you can buy some artisanal goods and what have you not. But honestly, with a long morning, half a day, Carcassonne is enough. Plenty. I appreciate that I walk fast. I appreciate that, maybe I take things in a lot faster than a lot of people. But I promise you, it doesn't require a big amount of time. The city is gorgeous through and through. Absolutely, dreamy, enchanting. The work of restoration was incredible in the 19th century by our friend Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, the famous restorer of Mont Saint-Michel and Notre Dame before the most recent restoration of Notre Dame, of course. So really, Carcassonne for many people is kind of fulfilling that medieval fantasy that perhaps many of us have. But what it's actually cool about Carcassonne, what gives it the UNESCO heritage status is the city walls. The city walls are actually what make this place incredible. The fortified city, which by the way has been there since ancient times, it's been controlled by Celts, by Romans, by Visigoths, by Carolingians, by everyone, everyone you can imagine. And then, of course, the most important family, the Trencavel family. The Trencavel family are actually the ones responsible for the building that you're seeing right here, which is the Chateau Comtal, which is actually the little chateau in Carcassonne itself. The Trencavel family come into power a little bit in a weird way. This happens in the 11th century, in 1067, if I remember correctly. There is a marriage between the sister of the Count of Carcassonne and Raymond Trencavel, the big Count of Nimes and also owner of Beziers, and that's kind of how it comes into their ownership. And it is really them, the one that built the city in terms of the town. The walls had been there since Roman times. In fact, whenever you go walking around Carcassonne and you see areas that have actual brickwork that, looks old, not necessarily from yesterday, from a restoration, that has been there since Roman times. Now, in fact, here you can see the tower right there. That's one of the Roman towers. Now, the reality is that once you walk around Carcassonne, you have, like I said, very few places to visit. You have the basilica, which is free of charge, and it's a very small basilica, so it's not going to take you more than 15 minutes, and I'm being generous, to see it. You have the Museum of the Inquisition, which frankly is a massive tourist trap and quite rubbish, so I wouldn't bother. If you want to really see stuff about the Inquisition, we have other places. It's very much a gimmick. And then you have Le Chateau Comtal. Now, is the Chateau Comtal the best castle, palace, whatever that you've seen in your life? No. It's mostly quite empty. It's only 2 buildings, and although the exhibition is interesting, well, it's lacking to some extent. But the entrance to the Chateau Comtal also gives you access to the perimeter of the walls, which is what you see right here. So you see Carcassonne, let's say the modern town here at the bottom. And then you see the wall itself going all around. It's quite a long perimeter that you get to walk, by the way. It's the best part of, I think, is 4 kilometers, something like that. And the only way you can access the walls is by actually getting in to the Chateau Comtal. You cannot walk the walls of Carcassonne on the top in any other way. You can walk around them, but you cannot walk the full length of them around them safely. So that's the only reason why I would suggest going into the Chateau Comtal. Don't get me wrong, there are some apartments inside the Chateau Comtal which are very pretty, like what you see in here. But the majority of the visit to Carcassonne is literally having a wander around the town. There are guided tours that you can join in through the tourist information office, etc. But if you actually want to walk the walls, I think it's worthwhile because of the views. You get a completely different understanding of the city of Carcassonne once you have the aerial perspective, because you then get why Philip of France is gonna get involved in this Albigensian crusade, and why the king and the pope will, join forces and try to get control of this area. It was too much of a threat. It was too much of a threat. And that's also the reason why, well, it's been protected ever since then, since Philip III and then Philip IV took over, and the reason why Carcassonne is indeed a very important UNESCO heritage site. So that's the idea. But remember, what really makes it a UNESCO place is the fortress. Now, you're thinking, well, so then what do I do if I go to Carcassonne? Don't worry, I have an extra alternative for you, which is this. Literally just outside of Carcassonne itself is Le Parc Australien, the Australian park. If, like me, you're probably quite unlikely to go to Australia in your lifetime because it's really far away, because it's a 24-hour journey by plane, etc., and not necessarily very expensive. This is a great way of actually engaging with that element of Aussie lifestyle, which I think is quite peculiar. So this is a park that essentially has as purpose the conservation and education not just of animals but of Australian Aboriginals. So there are parts of this park that don't just have the animals in their enclosures, but that actually engage with the traditional Aboriginal way of life, which I think is very important. If you're gonna visit this by, yeah, no doubt, you need to do it with the guided tour. The guided tour includes you looking at some very peculiar members of the park, like this baby albino wallaby, which is incredibly adorable, um, which is just great. And not just that, as part of the guided tour as well, you get to feed some of the animals safely. You get to learn a lot about the animals and about the park and its role in conservation. It's a really cool activity to do by all members of the family. In the summer months, they also have some areas of the park which are like a little bit adventure type of activity. So if you have kids, generally super fun. So, don't miss out, essentially. And now we're gonna leave the area of Carcassonne to go farther south, closer to the Spanish border. So I am taking you now to Villefranche-de-Conflent. Historically, this part of France was actually Catalonia. It belonged to Spain for the longest time. And well, I say Spain, it belongs specifically to Catalonia for the longest time. This is part of the Oriental Pyrenees, essentially. And Villefranche-de-Conflent is actually considered one of the plus beaux villages de France. This is one of those villages considered amongst the most beautiful in the whole country as part of this board assessment of places that are generally worth the while. The views are incredible. The road is incredible. The village itself, lovely. Well, if there is about 300 people in Villefranche-de-Conflent, I'm probably saying too many. The spectacular part of this place are the fortifications that you're seeing right here. They go back to the 9th century, which is where they start being fortified, because this was right on the edge of the conflict with the Visigoths and later on the Muslim kingdom of Al-Andalus. Well, Eventually, it will go over to French territory in the 17th century as part of the Treaty of the Pyrenees, and it will always be a frontier town here in the mountains in the area of the Canigou. The ramparts were improved by no other than Sébastien Bovin, one of the reasons why this area is also UNESCO heritage, you guessed, particularly the area around Fort Liberia. And well, it's an incredibly charming place. As you can see, this is on the right an example of the roads, which are, like I said, tiny, and on the left an example of the wonderful things that you can eat in Villefranche-de-Conflent for not a lot of money. I think the most expensive of the galettes that you're seeing in there cost about 12 euros. Everything incredibly fresh, uh, customer service incredible, and we were literally, even though the place was relatively small, maybe there was a total of 10 tables, if 3 of the tables were occupied. Again, I must insist, these are places that could really benefit from tourism, sustainable tourism, and that are not crowded by tourists. The day that we were visiting this was literally the first week of October, so the weather was still very good, and it was literally us and a bus of I think retired people from somewhere in Catalonia that have literally come from over the border for the day, because well, Barcelona is not that far away. It's less than 200 kilometers away from here. So one of those things. Now, like I said, the views, the scenery, definitely worth the while. Accessing the monuments is really not expensive. The area of the fortifications, I think it was like 3-4 euros per adult. Nothing really, you know, big deal. But on top of that, a very different type of scenery and spectacle activity for you to visit when you are in Villefranche-de-Conflent, such as this. This is Cova Bastera and Dinopedia experience. It's essentially like an underground theme park about dinosaurs and prehistory. It literally covers prehistory all the way to Carboniferous period. It's full of very cool, very well designed animatronics, replicas, etc. Life size specimens, by the way, which actually move and come alive as you go through it. It's an old cave that essentially was just, instead of left for dead, it was just repurposed because it doesn't really have a lot of let's say, geological interesting things for the sake of, well, creating this experience. And it's really cool. And yet another one, which is very important, right outside of the village, is this, Le Grotte de Canalettes. This has been dubbed in the world of tourism as the underground Versailles. It is an incredible, spectacular cave, beautiful, like very few I've seen in my life. I grew up in cave country in the north of Spain, guys. I know caves, and I know beautiful caves with beautiful formations very well. And Le Grotte de Canalettes is incredible. It's under the Canigou Massif, and it's family owned. It's private property. It only opened to the public in the 80s. You access this with a self-guided tour with an audio guide that takes you around the different areas, and it's just spectacular because I must insist, it's not just the formations that you're seeing in here which are breathtaking. They have gone the extra mile by including audiovisual representations, light shows with music. It's really, really amazing and breathtaking. Again, super quiet place. I think entrance for adults was about 12 euros, something like that. Really affordable, really good day out in Villefranche-de-Conflent. And then the final stop, Collioure. Collioure, just like Villefranche, um, used to be Spanish until the 17th century. It passed over to French hands with the Treaty of the Pyrenees. And just like Villefranche, the fortresses are also related to Sébastien Bovin. Well, the last attempt to take this part of France back by the Spaniards was in 1793. The village itself has about 2,500 people, so larger than Villefranche, but again, we're still talking of a village. And this is the beautiful combination between one country and the sea. The views are spectacular. As you can see, this was not a sunny day, and the fact that it was not a sunny day did definitely not ruin this picture that I needed 4 takes to acquire because the wind was so fierce, but my God, was it worth the while. Well, this is a very peculiar part of France because this is through and through Catalan country. You will hear more Catalan walking through the streets of Collioure than you probably will French or Spanish. And yet all of those languages and Occitan are actually spoken in here. So it's very interesting because you get to experience a very different France. I think that most people's idea of what France is about is Paris and the Loire Valley, and you call it a day, and it's just not fair, not fair at all. France is an incredibly big and diverse country, and really should be appreciated for all its glory. Well, now Collioure was a very important place back in the 20th century. It was a very artistic town. People like Matisse, Picasso, Mackintosh came here and borrowed inspiration from the town itself. It's very picturesque, it's very colorful, and being right on the edge of the sea gives it those dramatic landscapes that really become inspirational. Honestly, an absolute dream to walk around. Very dreamy, I think it's the word. Full of little shops, not just souvenir shops. I'm talking like, again, artisan workshops, traditional places like that. And sure, a few touristic places here and there, but, you know, really, really, really charming. A few more people are here though. Collioure is a place that has perhaps a bit more tourism. Its evocative landscapes and its importance historically has driven a lot of people here, both from France and Spain. And particularly because of this castle. And this is where I am afraid I'm going to have to engage with a topic that is not terribly fun, but alas, this is the job. This is the castle, which in reality is 4 castles put together. The first one was done by the Templars. Once again, here we are. The second one by the Kings of Majorca, then by the Habsburgs, and then by the Bourbon. It's actually quite an interesting castle to walk around, to understand, the shape of what a fortress actually is, how the buildings have been preserved and whatnot is actually very cool. And the views from the castle are really amazing. Again, the tickets were really not expensive at all, €5, if I remember correctly. But the reason why I came to Collioure and why I came to the castle is this. As of March 1939, it became the first a disciplinary camp for refugees of the Spanish Civil War. There is a huge work done by this castle, by Collioure, overall, to help people understand what happened here, how a government that was, in theory, a liberal government, because remember, this is just before the Second World War, actually put people running away from a war, from the Spanish Civil War, in concentration camps. Because disciplinary camps, but guys, by the way, are concentration camps. The only difference is that there was no active extermination, but often there were forced labor and the living conditions were not very nice. And well, I say that eventually in 1941, it will also be full of detainees from the Vichy regime, which, another fun part of history. And often many of them were used and recruited to essentially be sent to the North African front of the war to die in pretty unsavory conditions. So, as a Spanish person with family in France, as a result of the Spanish Civil War, I think you understand why this place was important for me. As a historian who is working really hard to bring awareness about these things this year, 2025, 50th anniversary of the death of Franco, and the start of the long journey to move Spain from a dictatorship to a democratic country, this is an important place. The work that the castle has done and the city of Collioure has done to actually bring the lives of all of these people to the forefront, to not be forgotten, and to put the facts in black and white is incredible. I take my hat off to them because it's not easy talking about, the things that we've done wrong in the past and do it in a way that is both respectful, engaging, and educational. So, kudos to Collioure in that regards. And finally, and the final piece of today is this. And the reason why a lot of Spanish people, as you can see, come here. This is the burial of Antonio Machado at the local cemetery, by the way. This is nowhere, not a grand, necropolis or anything like that. This is one of the greatest Spanish poets in history, part of the generation of the 98, a modernist poet. He was from Seville, moved to Madrid, spent time in Paris, really helped shape a whole generation of artists, of thinkers, of people. Eventually, the war separated him from his brother, as the country was literally split in half by the national rebels who were against the regime of the Second Spanish Republic. These, the national rebels will be the people who eventually will put Franco in place. He eventually escaped to the Levant of Spain with his mother as the forces were closing in. It was very obvious by then that the Republic was going to have a hard time stopping the rebels from pushing through, so there was no choice but to go into exile with another 500,000 people that pretty much were forced to do nothing but either surrender or be shot dead or cross the border. And he actually would die in Collioure out of pneumonia, if I remember correctly, in 1939. Machado never saw his country free of oppression. He died in a very unsavory way for somebody that had been pioneer for his people. Definitely not appropriate for a man of his stature. And yet, as you can see, the memorial here is incredible. The flags that you're seeing, by the way, in case you don't recognize, is the Spanish flag. That is a Republican Spanish flag. That is why it's purple. It only became red, yellow, and red again after this little hiccup. But that, the three colors, is actually the original flag of Spain at this moment in time. I don't think I probably need to say more as to why coming here was so important for me, as to why for any Spanish person it's so important to come here. If you care about history, if you care about what's happening in the world around us in many places, if you care about freedom of speech, if you care about fighting for what's right, if you care about the future, if you care about the arts, this is the reason why today I do something that is quite out of the ordinary for me, which is end in such a somber tone, because it's my duty, because it's necessary, because it's important we don't forget, because it's important that people like Machado and many others are commemorated, because it's important that we learn to owe up to our mistakes historically, and we talk about them, and we talk about them openly, and we learn to do better. And it's important when we decide to go to another country that we let that country teach us something. Holidays for the sake of rest and vacation is very important, but it's also important that we expose ourselves to the other, to the things that we don't know. They will leave an imprint in our souls, in our minds, and hopefully that imprint will allow us to make the world a slightly better place, if nothing else, than what we found before we came along. And today, this is all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for listening to this. I hope this has given you some inspiration of some beautiful places, of some important places, places of reflection, perhaps for a holiday, perhaps for more. On that note, I hope to see you on the next one. Take care of yourselves. Have a lovely day. And remember, there is always something that we can do better, no matter who we are, where we are in history or time. Take very good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.